inauguración del año académico. Ese es el líder.
Bueno, buenas tardes, bienvenidos. Qué bueno ver esta sala tan llena porque es un privilegio para nosotros, un honor presentar a la profesora Jacqueline Eccles. Me pidieron que hiciera esta presentación recién porque el presentador oficialmente no llegó, así que me van a disculpar si estoy un poco no muy articulada, pero la profesora Eccles es una de las más importantes psicólogas del desarrollo de su generación. Ella ha trabajado por más de 30 años en el tema de expectativas de profesores, de motivación, de socialización de roles de género, el ajuste entre el contexto escolar y el desarrollo, sobre todo en la adolescencia y en momentos de transición en el desarrollo, como lo son el paso a la escuela secundaria, el paso al segundo ciclo de enseñanza básica, que es lo que nosotros llamamos, y para todas las personas que estudiamos educación y que estudiamos contextos escolares y que estudiamos socialización y desarrollo social en alguna mayor o menor medida, la profesora Eccles ha sido una figura muy importante en las teorías que buscan explicar todos estos fenómenos. Así que ella ha recibido muchos premios que, como no venía preparada, los tendría que leer, pero los voy a invitar a que ustedes los busquen después si gustan. Y también ha sido presidente de la SRA, la Sociedad de Investigación en la Docencia. Ella está invitada para dar la charla inaugural en la inauguración del año académico el próximo lunes y creímos que era una tremenda oportunidad para todos ustedes poder escuchar. Y la profesora Eccles me ha pedido decirles que ella habla muy rápido, que si ustedes necesitan que ella vaya un poco más lento, por favor, levante la mano y le pido. Así que lo voy a dejar con ella y va a presentar el día en socialización, influencias familiares en las elecciones que hacen los niños y las niñas en relación a tareas escolares. Así que los dejo con la profesora y no sé si es bastante después cuando terminamos.
Thank you for the introduction. I have no idea what you said. Only wonderful things. So I talk fast, indicating you want me to slow down. I'm happy to take questions at any time. I don't have to finish the talk. And I'm leaving the PowerPoint here, so you can see it again if you want. So I began my research, I'm 40 years ago, so a long time ago. And I was interested in the question of why do people do things with their lives. So I started the work looking at the question of why girls don't go on into STEM and mathematics, and then began thinking, well, that's just part of another question, which is why does anybody do anything? And I'm a motivational psychologist. So my colleagues and I tried to come up with a way to think about that question. And I am a boxologist. I study boxes and arrows. I turn every idea into boxes and arrows. And so this was an attempt that we made to try to think about this question. And the question would be achievement-related choices. Would be one such choice would be, am I going to take mathematics or not? Am I going to be a scientist or not? And we tried to put it in a socio-cultural perspective to look also at not just the psychological processes, but the family processes. So you can see in yellow where we tried to put into the model a set of ideas about the fact that people as they grow up are socialized into these beliefs about the self, and then we try to actually make it simpler. So what I'm going to talk today is a model of how we should think about parents. You could do a similar one for teachers, But essentially what I'm arguing is that there are what I would call exogenous influences, which are things such as the child's exogenous in the way a sociologist thinks about it. It's one step back. So I'm more interested in understanding those processes rather than these, but these set the stage. So the stage is that you have children's objectives and performance on anything that they do. You have the child's sex as a cue that the parents can use, or the teachers or the peers. You have the parents' gender role stereotypes. So they have beliefs about what it means to be a boy or a girl. They have other general beliefs that have to do with many things. Have to do with, what's important to learn, what's important to study. They have psychological characteristics themselves, such as, how patient are they? How competitive are they? Are they aggressive? Do they have good mental health? And there's also the fact that the families live in neighborhoods which have risks and protective factors. So the children and the family are nested in a larger social system. And I believe that these exogenous factors actually affect very specific beliefs that parents have. So I'm going to be talking about those. So parents' causal attributions for their children's performance. So if my child does well or if my child does poorly, why do I think that happened? Parents' reactions to the children's performance. So do they respond positively or negatively? Do they respond coldly or warmly? The parents' perceptions of the children's interests and competences. The parents' expectations for their children's success. And the parents' perceptions of the importance of various skills and activities. So this is where you take these sort of exogenous, more general beliefs. They end up affecting more specific beliefs about specific activities and your child in particular. That then will translate into parents' behaviors, things such as the advice they give their children, the kinds of toys they buy for them, the kinds of opportunities they give for them. And those in turn will then affect the child. So if we're thinking about the family, what we're assuming is that the family has an effect on the child. I typically study these motivational processes, and I'll talk more about those on Monday. But today I'm going to be talking about these characteristics. Now, children do affect their parents, and that comes back around. If you see down there, what we've got is the children's performance and their attitudes and their beliefs. And of course, they come back around here, and you've got the performance feeding back in here. So the parents are in fact responding in this whole process to their children. No, that's fine. I'm not going to. Because of the back front, I'll stay mostly here. So essentially, what I look at very, very carefully is the children's perceptions play a very important. It was. No, it's okay. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. No, I talk loud, but yeah. Yes, just stop me, because it's better you hear me than you don't. So I'm interested in children's perceptions of all of these processes. And if you look at gender, or how might sex and gender play a role, well, I've already said the child's sex will affect these specific beliefs, which will in turn affect the parents' behaviors. So I'm going to be talking a lot today in particular about how you use this model and what kind of evidence do we have that the child's sex actually plays a role in this process. Because remember, I started with the question, why aren't girls as likely as boys to go on into the STEM and mathematical fields? Okay, so do parents' perceptions of their children's academic abilities predict children's own confidence in their academic abilities? So I'm going to essentially build a story for how we link these various pieces in the boxology to each other and go from the child's sex to the parents influencing the children to the children's. So yes, I'm going to talk about two studies. The first is the Michigan study of adolescent lives in transition, called MSOL. This is a longitudinal study of one birth cohort. They were in the 6th grade when we started. And we have now followed them, it says there, until 25. I just finished collecting data on them at 45. The data that I'm going to be talking about in this data set are gathered from middle school and high school. So remember, these people are now 45 years old, so that situates them in terms of their generation. We used mostly questionnaires in the school. We recruited the children through the schools. So we have a very good sample in 12 different school districts that we started with. And then we recruited family participation through the school. We had very, very high participation rate. The students, about 80% of the students in the classrooms participated initially. This is just an example of the design. So the kinds of data we collected at each point in time. And then, as I said, we've now gone out to getting just mailed questionnaires from the young people who are no longer young, or middle-aged. So the characteristics of the sample: it's a predominantly white sample in southeastern Michigan. This is the auto industry in the United States. It's right at the base of the Great Lakes, so it's a little bit over from Chicago. I say this because the sample is primarily white, but has quite a bit of variation in social class. And at that area in the United States, at that time, social class was primarily a factor, was primarily related to education, not to family income, because it was a heavily unionized area. So families made very good income if they worked in the auto industry, which many did. So it was very likely in a neighborhood you would have families where both parents or one or both parents worked in the factories, and parents who were teachers, and probably not doctors, but sort of the BA level professional levels. About 45% of these children went on to university, went on to some kind of tertiary education. So what measures do I have? Well, I have the teacher's ratings of each child's math ability. So I'm going to be looking at math ability. I'm wanting to control for how good a child actually is, and I'm using the teacher's rating of that. So I have an exogenous, independent assessment of the child's math ability. I'm going to be talking at points also about sports, because we measured that, and it's another sex-type area, and it's an area where the parents have even more influence. I have the parents' ratings of their own child's math ability, and these are the items. Very easy to measure, very, very high reliability. If you want it, I can get you the information, but these are all have alphas of about 0.8. The children's ratings of their own math abilities, and here's the items that we use. Again, very, very high alphas on these kinds of items, very easy to use. They can be used with any activity you want to put in there. So I have math in parentheses. You can put English, sports, instrumental music, playing drums, whatever you want, and it works equally well. So do the parents appear to have an effect? So this is a path analysis based on this data. We have the teacher's ratings. Good if I move some. I don't have a pointer, so you can see the teacher's ratings of the children's math ability. Now, what's interesting is that predicts the parents' ratings of the child's English ability. It also predicts, this is the mothers and daughters. We've seen the same effect with fathers and with sons. That also predicts the mother's ratings of the child's math ability. Okay? Now, the reason it's high for English is kids tend to do very well. How well they do in English tends to be highly related to how well they're doing in math, particularly for girls. And this, okay, you're gonna let me move farther. Here, we'll go underneath this. Okay. Then at the other end, I want to point out two things for you. So we're looking here at changes. I'm controlling for prior levels of the kids' own sense of their own abilities and their own interests. And you can see that mother's perceptions of math ability, in fact, influences changes in the daughter's perceptions of their own math ability after you control for how good the teacher thinks they really are. So The parents are in fact fairly accurate, but also in fact the teacher's rating has no effect, is totally mediated through the parents' perception of their kids' math, of their daughter's math abilities. Now, this is also true for the children's math interest. So mother's perceptions of how good their daughter is in math influences how much interest the daughter has in math after you've controlled for how well they actually are doing. But I think equally interesting is mother's beliefs about their daughter's English abilities negatively predicts to the daughter's beliefs about their math ability. So if your mother thinks you're good in English and you're a girl, you're going to underestimate how good you are in math. And you're going to have less interest in math. Is that okay? So we're not just getting the direct effect, which is what we thought we would get, we're also getting a cross-domain effect, which becomes very important for understanding gender. We get the same effect for boys, but it's very unlikely that a mother is going to think a boy is better in English than in math. So the effect is muted for boys. But if the mother thinks they're very good in English, she also will have a son who underestimates his math ability. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that math ability does not affect perceptions of English ability. This is a one-way domain, cross-domain effect. It goes from English, the native language, to math. It doesn't go both directions. So it's not the case that it's just a comparison. It's a particular kind of comparison from your native language to your perceptions of mathematics. Now, we could think about why that's true. Probably because parents play a much greater role in their children's acquisition of English and reading than they do their child's acquisition of math. Math is much more likely being going on in the school, and the parents are probably having less of an impact on that. Whereas they talk to their kids and they engage in English-related activities a lot. Well, not a lot, but more than that. All right, so we then wanted to look and see, well, how young is this? How young does this occur? And we have a second study that we did that is called Childhood and Beyond. Similar design, except we started early in elementary school. Similar hypotheses, similar measures. This group is now 35 years old, so this was done after the other study. And I'm going to show you the data. So it's about 912 kids. From 4 school districts, again, primarily middle class, again in southeastern Michigan. So we have, again, good measures from the parents and the kids. What's interesting is we can get pretty good measures on the kids all the way down to the first grade on these kinds of self-beliefs. We do it more on a one-to-one basis rather than having them fill out the questionnaire. But we actually get quite high alphas and very good factor analytic results. So this now is the data in this population. At wave 2 was when, this is a 3-cohort study, so the children are in 1st, 2nd, and 4th grade. So again, we have the teacher's ratings of the child's math ability. We have the mother's ratings of their child's math ability. We have the children's ratings of their own math ability. So this is a cross-lag SEM model. And you can see that the stability of the children's ratings from wave 2 to wave 3, 1 year different, is much lower than the stability rating of the parents' estimates of their child's math ability. But again, what we find is the impact, there's no impact of children on the parents' belief. There is an impact, significant impact going from the teacher to the parents down to changes in the child's perception. Okay. So again, evidence that these perceptions that parents have of their children's abilities are predictively related longitudinally to changes in their children's own perceptions of their abilities.
Can I ask a question? In these models, did you also test the direct effect from teacher to child, or
Yes.
and that's not significant? Okay.
Well, yes, it's significant at wave 2.
Right, no, but from teacher to child? Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
oh,
that's
sorry.
right.
No, in the other one, I was wondering whether...
Yes, we
the
did
other
there
one-
too.
okay,
We did there
then
too.
it wasn't.
The same is true for sports, and it's even stronger, which is what you might expect because the parents are playing a much more active role. So we again had the teachers' ratings of the kids' sports skills. The teachers were very reluctant to give us that information. They said, we don't know, but it turns out it is very reliable. And you can ask a teacher how good a child is in sports, and you will get a rating that it's because we actually measured when they got older. We gave them a test of motor skills, and we looked at teachers' ratings from year to year to year, very consistent from year to year to year, and very predictive of the kids' performance on these standardized motor control studies. Okay. So, parents' perceptions are powerful predictors of changes in the children's own perceptions of their own abilities after controlling for their actual performance indicators. Now let's turn to gender. Okay, so I will read this to you. How many know Kathy cartoons? Have you seen them at all? Okay, well, so this is a syndicated cartoon. So Kathy is going into the toy store to buy a gift for a friend who has a child. And she says, may we, it's small, so, are we shopping for a little girl or a little boy today? And she says, we're shopping for a little unisex person. A little unisex person who will like a Death Charger attack missile that transforms into a slimy machine gun monster, or a little unisex person who would like a makeup set. And she says, a little unisex person who would like a non-sex stereotyped, non-role related, non-gender specific gift. And the store lady says, voila, a dinosaur. And Kathy says, perfect. They may have had to go back to the prehistoric times and find it, but the toy industry finally has something for children that won't limit their expectations for themselves. And then the store lady says, do you want that dinosaur in a manic demolisher combat outfit or the designer in a ballerina bridesmaids outfit? Okay, and then to relate this to math, this is a young girl going into a math teacher saying, hello, I'm a beautiful little blonde girl and I'm here to defy the stereotype. So, what do we know about gender in this process? Well, what we know is that compared to parents of sons, parents of daughters think that math is harder for their child, even though daughters get better grades than math. That their child is having to work harder to do well in math if it's a daughter than if it's a son. That their child has to try harder in math than in English. And that their daughter will do less well in future math-related careers. We get similar effects for sports and the opposite effect for English. So this is based on our data. This is what we know from these parents. All of these things are true. Despite the fact that on our standardized measures, there's no gender difference in math, and the boys do worse on English. So there is a gender difference on English, but not on math. So, and this is an example of this finding. So this is the rating of, this is parents' ratings. This is back to the MSALT data. This is parents' ratings of their child's effort in math and English. And you can see that for girls, they think their daughter is having to, is putting out more effort than sons. And in English, it's the reverse. But even more importantly, if you're a boy, if you have a son, you think they're putting out about equal effort in the two subject matters. But if you're talking about a daughter, you're saying she's having to work much harder than she's having to work in English. And we're going to keep coming back to this within gender comparison. I think it's much more important than the between gender. That this may be what's driving, and we've already seen an example of that. That mothers' estimates of their child's math abilities leads girls to underestimate their English abilities, leads them to underestimate their math abilities. So we have similar findings all the way down to the first grade. And, well, actually, they don't become significant. They are smaller for children in kindergarten and first grade, but by second grade, they are significant in the same directions. So this then is an example from the CAB study, the parents' ratings of their child's abilities. So in the CAB study, we separated out how much natural talent does your child have versus how much skill do they have, and you can see that it follows a very gender stereotype difference. And again, as I said, no evidence, no objective evidence of any gender difference except in English. So not in sports at this point, because the girls are more mature than the boys, so actually they are in fact more coordinated and probably would do better, and they certainly have better patience to learn sports. So parents have different views of sons and daughters. Why? So we wanted to understand that. What's going on? Where do these differences come from? And we have the model that tries to say we can understand that. So one explanation is that the boys are actually better at mathematics than the girls, and vice versa for English. Maybe the parents are right, and we're not seeing it in the tests, but maybe they're actually right. That's very hard to determine because we know that boys and girls are treated differently from birth. But what we do know is that at this age, in the CAB study, we have no evidence, objective evidence, and we have no objective evidence that the girls are actually working harder. So the girls are doing, well, girls in general are working harder than boys, but if you're looking at the very best students in math, the girl children are working just as hard as the boy children are working just as hard as the girl children. So not across the population, but if you're looking at the ones that are doing the best in math, or at the top of the performance hierarchy, what you will get is that the boys are working, the parents estimate how much time their child has put in. We've gathered homework, we've had the teacher rate how hard each child works independently, and we have no evidence that there's a difference that emerges when we don't make salient the gender comparison to the reporter. So if you ask teachers who works harder, they'll tell you the girls work harder than the boys. If you ask the teacher to individually rate the amount of effort each child in her class is putting in to learning math, you will not get the gender. So I'm an attribution theorist. Let's see whether or not parents have different attributions for boys and girls' performances. So we asked the parents, this is an MSALT, to remember the last time their daughter or their son came home with a very good grade in math, and then we asked them a series of questions. Why is that true? And how much was it due to hard work? How much was it due to having a good teacher? How much was it due to the help that you gave them? How much was it due to how hard they worked? Okay. And what you can see is that parents, for boys, they said, well, it's how talented they are and how hard they worked. So they did acknowledge the boys are working hard, but for the girls, what they don't acknowledge is talent. So they say, no, it's not really due to talent, it's due to how hard she works. Okay? So the parents are attributing their daughter's successes in math to how hard they're working. Now, how many of you know the mindset work now? Okay, so Carol Dweck talks a lot about it's important to attribute things to effort. So you might say, well, they're doing just the right thing for girls. They're attributing it to effort. They're not telling them they're smart. Okay, well, over time, what this attribution pattern does is it distorts or changes the parents' estimations of their children's diligence in math and effort in math. So this is now not the attribution, but this is, well, how hard is your child working? How much talent does your child have? And to the extent that the parents attribute their child's performance, successes, to effort, what you find is over time, they think that the child's talent, their estimates of their child's talent decline, and their estimates of their child's diligence go up. You get the opposite effect if they attribute it to natural talent. So what you've got is a process where they make a different attribution today. A year from now, they now have had a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they come to see their daughter's natural talents as lower than their son's, which would then, you can imagine, translate into, and we have some evidence on this, when the daughter says, I think I want to be an engineer, mom's going to say, maybe you should be a writer instead. And a different pattern with the son. Again, now this is a literal model, and what we find is that the children's gender affects their estimates of their child's math ability. No, I'm wrong. The child's gender relates to the child's math ability based on the teacher's estimates, which does affect the talent, the attributions as you would expect, but over time it translates into the children's own estimates. So this now, what we've got is the extent to which the parent attributes the child's successes to talent, just like with the parents, over time that child thinks they're better. To the extent that the child does it to skills, you get a similar effect, but not as significant. Hard work leads to a decline. So the extent to which you attribute your child's successes to hard work, the child actually comes to think they're less good. Yeah. Okay? I see puzzled faces. Essentially, this is just like the data for the parents, but for the kids. Okay, so what you're doing is a T, I'm sorry, it's time 1 and time 2. So these are the kids' estimates of their math ability. Time 1, kids' estimates of their math ability. Time 2, parents' attributions. And you can see that, yes, the parents are making attributions that are in fact being influenced by the kids' attributions, but that attribution over time leads to the kinds of self-fulfilling prophecies that we're talking about. So, parents do make all of these effects are small, because by and large the parents are fairly accurate. So what we're talking about is the error, the variance around whatever we would want to call an accurate estimate of one's abilities. So which way is it likely to be biased, if it's biased? And these are not huge biases, but they're enough of a bias that sort of carried out over 12 years will lead to boys and girls making very different decisions when they get to the point of deciding which courses to take. That's the argument that I'm making. What about stereotypes? So we had talked about it. So attributions is one mechanism. Maybe parents' stereotypes are also influencing their perceptions of their kids. So here's another cartoon. So the young boy comes to his dad. Dad, will you explain to me the theory of relativity to me? I don't understand why time goes slower at great speed. Dad said, it's because you keep changing time zones, see? If you fly to California, you gain 3 hours on a 5-hour flight, right? Now, of course, that's not what the theory of relativity says. So if you go on at the speed of light, you gain more time because it doesn't take as long to get there. Of course, the theory of relativity only works if you're going west. Gee, that's not what Mom said at all. She must be totally off her rocker. Well, we men are better at abstract reasoning. Just go tell her that. So Jan Jacobs and I tried to take this kind of model, again, a boxologist, I'm sorry, that's the way my mind works, and we wanted to see whether or not the child's sex by the parents' stereotypes affected the parents' views of their children's abilities. So we're controlling, we measure their stereotypes, we ask them who is better in math? Boys a lot better, boys a little better, about the same, girls some better, girls a lot better. We know their child's sex, we have the teacher's estimate of the child's actual ability, and we can put in an interaction term between the sex of the child and the stereotypes that the parents hold. And what that's going to tell you is, again, the extent to which they distort their view of their child's math ability in the direction of their stereotype. And we coded the stereotype in the direction of the male. So if they hold the stereotype that males are better in math, and they have a daughter, will they be lowering their estimate of their child's ability? Whereas if they have a son, they would be raising their estimate of the child's ability. And that's indeed what we find. So we have a significant effect, 0.17, which is in the direction that parents controlling for, this is the accuracy component. So the parents are actually pretty accurate. They're estimating their child's ability primarily based on the teacher's estimate of their ability. So that's 0.58. You get a significant distorting or moderating effect, which goes in the direction if they're talking about a boy and they hold a stereotype, they will raise the score, that they will overestimate their son's math ability and underestimate their daughter's math ability. Okay, is that? Yep. We get the same, no, yes, we get the same, we get the reverse effect in English, and we get the same effect in sports, even more marked for sports. Boys. So I'm showing you math, but in all three domains, to the extent that the parent endorses a gender stereotype for that domain, they will distort their beliefs about their children's competences in the direction that is consistent with the child's sex and the stereotype. So parents both make differential attributions, and these stereotypes have an effect, and these processes could help us explain why it is that the parents estimate their daughter's math abilities to be lower than their sons, and vice versa, their sons' abilities in English to be lower than their daughters, and again, vice versa for sports. So what? So, all right, so I've shown you that if you stay in the head and you ask all these questions, you will find some evidence that stereotypes are in fact operating and are leading parents to have a slightly distorted view of their children's competencies that are consistent with the gender stereotypes. Does it make any difference? So what we wanted to see is, do these beliefs, first of all, affect the kids' beliefs? And you've already seen some evidence to that effect. Here's one more piece of evidence where we can show that, again, holding constant the kids' math grades. This is the MSALT data, now as they're moving into the 7th grade. And what you can see is that the mother's perceptions of the child's ability and how hard they have to work in order to do well affects the child's self-perceptions, which then affects the child's expectations for success a year later. Okay, so we can take essentially all the way through the sequence from, do the parents have differences, and does that matter? Does it actually affect the kids? And yes, it does. Does it vary on the kinds of activities they provide for their kids? So we asked the parents in the CAB study, while the kids were in elementary school, we essentially collected data on everything they did with their kid. Every toy they bought for them, every course they put them in, every special activity they put them in, and essentially these are going to be quite small, but the yellows are the significantly higher incident. So if you sort of look at them across the board, many of these activities are gender typed in what the parents provide. And again, they follow exactly the stereotypic line. So have your child read to you. More likely to do it if you're talking about a daughter than a boy. Play sports with your child. More likely if it's a son than if it's a daughter. Do active outdoor activities with your child. More likely if you're a son than a daughter. Take your child to a sporting event. And these are now 1st, 2nd, 3rd graders. But these are not more likely if you have a son. Encourage your child to do math or science related activities at home. More likely if it's a son. Encourage your child to play with computers. More likely if it's a son. Encourage your child to read. More likely if it's a daughter. Encourage your child to play competitive sports. More likely if it's a son, etc. Just write down the list. Now, what's interesting is the only area in gender role studies that I know where the processes that are going on early in elementary school are different than the processes in the adult world is in instrumental music. So men are much more likely to be involved professionally in instrumental music than women. But encourage your child to take music lessons, more likely if it's a girl than if it's a boy. Okay, if you now look across these grades, so you look at each year, because we gathered the data over several years, so this is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. Items purchased to help the child in math and science, each year, more likely if it's a boy than if it's a girl. These people are 35. How many people remember 35? Not many. How many people are in their 30s?
¿Cuántos de ustedes tienen 30?
This is just sort of place. Is this odd or not? This is not that old. This is not that long ago that we're getting these differences. And then if you now look as you aggregate across grades 2, 3, and 5, this just shows you the differential across different subject areas by boys and girls in terms of providing the activities across all of these different activities, all these majors. Sports is particularly interesting, so parents are much more likely to both promote sports, to indirectly promote sports, and to enroll their child in a team sport in this generation. It doesn't matter. Well, when you actually look at this data then across time, what we've done is do a path analysis, and what we find is that the child's sex, the differential in the promotion in sports, for example, is mediated by these differential perceptions. So parents perceive their child to be less good if it's a girl, or more good if it's better if it's a boy, which then translates into these provisions and activities. Do these behaviors matter? Does it actually affect the kids? So we've looked at this in a variety of ways, and what I'm going to show you in concluding here is just one particular way we've tried to think about how do you relate parenting practices to kid outcomes. Now, the typical way that you would do it is to put them into a regression or a path analysis. And what that does is that gives you the unique effect of each parenting practice. So it actually pits them against each other. We didn't think that was the right way to go. What we wanted instead was a measure that was the aggregate. So how many things were happening in the family that would encourage participation in the child? So we built on the work by Samaroff and other people in the risk and resilience literature that essentially took all of the risks, because they were making the same argument. Look, I don't really care which risk is the most important. What I want to know is how risky is the child's life space. So I'm wanting to say how promoted is the child's life space for particular skills. So what they did was they had a cut point, and theirs was like, it was either we know it's a risk because it's a dichotomous variable and we know which is the risky side, or they took the kids who were in the top 25% of a risk factor. So we did the same. What we did was to take the kids who were in the top 25% of each of the promotive factors that we had, and we gave them a point, and then we added the points up. So essentially, we had many different measures, and we essentially, your score would range from 0 to 5, depending on whether you were getting a lot of each of these things. Okay, so as I said, it goes 1 actually to 5 when it's 4 or more, because there are very few that get 5. And you can see that when you look at this number, the boys are more likely to be at the 0 end than the girls. But at every other place, so if you look at 1 and 2, the boys are more likely to be getting 1 and 2. The girls are more likely at the far end out there, but there are fewer girls. There are fewer people getting 3 and 4. So what you're getting is a sort of curvilinear relationship on this one with girls. Is that correct? No, I'm wrong. I've got it exactly backwards. Girls are getting more, the boys are getting more 0, the girls are getting more 1s and 2s, and the boys are getting more 3s and 4s. Does this affect it? So what we did was to look at changes in the children's self-concept of ability, liking, and importance of mathematics at the time that we gathered the parent data, and then 1 year later. So we're looking at both wave 3 and wave 4. And you can see, just as they were getting in the risk and resiliency literature, you get a very nice linear association. So the more of these things you're getting, the more you are to come to think you're better at math, to like math, and think math is important. So what parents do matters, at least if you look at it in this way. The more things your family does, the better off you are. Similarly in sports, so the girls are much more likely to get 0, and the boys are more likely than the girls to get 4. And again, what you get is this very nice linear effect, even stronger for sports than for mathematics. So what parents do matters. It does affect both performance as well as these values, their expectancies, abilities, self-concepts, interests, and utility. And they do it, and they end up doing it, distorting it in a way that is gender stereotypical. So I'll stop there.
across all of studies, you were expecting to think fine and you have to define. Maybe you were things that you were not expecting and you have to count. There are things that you have to expect that you not find.
Yes, to make yourself clear. I didn't know whether I didn't find some of the things that I expected to find, and I would say, no, I'm a very good theoretician. I only found things I expected. No, that's not.
What happened to you in theology back and now
You're asking about her expectations.
No, I study expectations, so I create this myself. No, we found some things that we didn't. One of the things that we weren't certain of was whether we'd be able to measure some of these beliefs in children as young as the 1st and 2nd grade. I was surprised that we could do that, and many other people were as well, but it turns out that young children both can answer that question and differentiate already across domains, even domains they haven't had much experience with. So kids would give us answers that were very reliable for music, even though they had never had a lesson in music. And parents would give us estimates, very reliable estimates, of their child's ability to learn a musical instrument, even though their child had never had an instrumental music class. So I was surprised both that we could measure it, that they would be consistent, and how quickly these perceptions of the self and perceptions of the parents of the self were forming, almost in the absence of very much information. So that's suggesting these processes are going on quite early and quite reliably in our data set. I wasn't surprised to find that, when you think about the music finding, we then asked the families, well, why do you think girls would be better at learning a musical instrument? And almost none of them said because girls have more talent. What do you think they said? No, they didn't say coordination.
They practice more.
They said patience. They said patience and willingness to do what an adult tells them. Now, apparently, they don't think that's a problem in sports. Because they think boys will do fine in sports, but boys will not do fine in music. I suspect that's a cultural phenomenon. And I would love to do it in some countries where music starts younger and is expected that everyone will learn music. There are some wonderful cultural differences that need to be explored in this work. I was surprised that the parents, I had predicted it, but I was surprised at how powerful the effect was of the parents as mediators of the teacher's beliefs. And this is important when you think of interventions in something like this. We first say we're going to intervene with teachers, and our data are suggesting you probably better look at parents, because it looks like the parents are the mediators of the impact of the teachers. It isn't the case that these kids are forming a notion of how good they are in math based on what the teacher tells them. They're forming a picture based on what the parent tells them that happens to be related to what the teacher says.
Related to that, can you talk a little bit more about this thing that appears that the kids' output, grades or whatever, achievement in math, didn't seem to have an effect on the parents' needs or stereotypes, or their perception, the child's perception. It didn't seem to affect, at least in the first model when you have the mother and the beginning and the
No, the mothers are quite accurate even at the beginning.
Yes, I know, but the child doesn't seem that what the child believes doesn't seem to have an effect on the mothers.
Well, yes, and so if you're interested in the question of reciprocity between children and parents, I was showing you data from younger children that the children's beliefs did not have a significant cross-lag effect on the parents. We have now looked at this over time. And by about grade 10, you start to get evidence that the children are affecting the parents' beliefs. In the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, it's an equal effect. So what you've got is a nice developmental story that says the parents seem to be affecting the kids' beliefs during the early years. Then they sort of develop a point where they're equally affecting each other, and then the parents lose their effect, and parents are primarily responding to what the kids are saying. You know, I'm not good at this, Mom, just let me out of it. You know. So we get that when we look developmentally. But in the early periods, it looks like it's coming more from the interpretation of the parents. Yeah.
Okay, so how do your results relate to the mindset work? Because I saw that there was maybe a contradiction.
There is.
Because what I remember from the mindset work by Carol Dweck is that you have to tell your child to attribute to effort and not so much to talent, so that they think that it can be adapted.
Did you
or
all hear
changed.
that? For those who are motivational people, this is a very important point.
Yeah, but, yeah.
I'm trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Okay. We both have used we come at this from a very, we both come from an expectancy framework. Hers is very much an expectancy framework. Mine's an expectancy framework. I've been very interested in whether or not people choose to study this when they have a choice. So do they choose to take it when it becomes an optional subject matter? And do they choose to go into a career? She's interested in, do they keep working hard on it when they have to do it? Those are two very different systems. So if you think, and she does it, and we've talked some because we're good friends, and so she says, well, I would recommend something different than you would. And I said, well, you have to stop back and think about, well, what is your goal? If your goal is to get the kids to continue to work on math problems when they have difficulty, you want to make sure they believe that if they work harder, they will do better. And that's the fundamental message of mindset.
Yeah.
They have to believe that if they work hard, they will get better. And that their current ability to master that material is not limited by some talent, by something stable in their lives that they cannot handle. If you want them to pick a career, you want them to be thinking about their relative abilities to achieve at very high levels. That's a different choice. And what our data is saying, okay, we got to have everybody, it's in part a consequence of what we make kids do in the schools. So if you're going to make a kid have to do math, have to sit there and learn it, then you better make them able to believe that they can do it. And you better give them enough instruction that they actually can do it. So that you set up their world in a way that they can master that task. But to kid them that there's no differences in aptitude that could predict how far you actually, how great a mathematician you could become, is probably not wise. Because you're going to get people then wanting to do things that when they move into the adult world, they may in fact not be very good at it. And I would argue that part of what people are trying to do in understanding the self is to figure out what's easier for them and what they enjoy more. So what you want to do is to give both kinds of messages. So I would say if you've got a girl and you think she could do something that is counter the gender stereotype, then you better tell her she's got the capacity to do it. Because otherwise she's not going to reach that conclusion. And if you tell her she's working really hard, that will make her continue to do well, but it won't make her make this other translation.
No, but I think there's a problem in that logic, because I can understand that conclusion if you start from the point one. I can imagine two possibilities. One, we agree with the idea that there are some talents that are distributed, so they are genetically or something, persons that are better for math than others. So that's completely logical. I disagree. I think that we have no evidence for that. So I see a problem there. But it's a matter of research. So, but I can understand the logic of the conclusion also if we are thinking in the mindset of fixed intelligence. Because even if there is no talent, concrete or specific, genes or I don't know, but if you think in the terms, yeah, talent matters. So I think there is a relationship between the two of them, because if you are thinking in a developmental mindset, you can always tell someone, make an effort,
And you'll get better.
and you get better.
That's right, and I believe that, and we absolutely need to say that to people.
Yeah, but I think that but I don't see why you need to tell the people that you have some non-existent ability, because it's.
Well, I don't say you should tell them they have some non-existent ability.
Yes, it's an assumption.
I think the genetic data is pretty clear now. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and this is a very important philosophical stance. But I'm going to forget his name. Who is the person that believes it's all inward? It's in Florida.
Erickson. Anders Erickson.
Yes, Anders Ericsson. Even he is coming to believe that there are some propensities that are operating that make it easier for some people to master some areas than others. But
At the highest level, but
At the highest level.
in school, the national curriculum,
absolutely, no, it's
everybody
fine.
should be able to.
and I absolutely agree
But
with that.
it's not
I
like
absolutely agree with that. So I have no question.
I think the difference you made is essential.
Well, but he's saying he doesn't like the difference I'm making. So I'm not having the debate with him, not with him. I also, because I come from a choice perspective and a self perspective, so I don't come from how can we get kids to work the hardest. I come from a perspective of a person sort of figuring out who they are, what they want to do with their lives. So I'm coming from a slightly different perspective on what's going on. I think it is the case that people draw inferences based on a variety of cues about what they like and what they would prefer to spend their time doing. And part of that is coming to some sense of, I'm better at this than I am at that, or I have more potential at this than I have at that. Now, if you don't give them some kind of, I think at some level we have to say, where are we going to get, if we tell everybody, oh, it's just hard work, so just hard and you can be anything you want, that's not going to be very satisfying to an 8-year-old, and it's not going to be very satisfying to an 18-year-old who has to have some reason to pick something.
Can you show me please again the slide with the boxes? What's the first one?
My boxes and arrows?
Yeah, but the first model that you showed.
Sure. I think it's easiest if I go out. Okay, here's where the Mac person in me comes out.
So the first one with data, where you show the relation between teacher and parents and the mom.
Oh, so it's a data slide.
Data slide.
Okay, that was the first one.
No, I'm sorry, another one. The one where the teacher, again, the mom was mediating the. That might be or the previous one. I was curious about a couple of things. One is the fact that the teacher seems to be like the first.
We can use the arrow.
You have no talent. I'm not the Windows person.
There we go.
So somehow the teacher's weighting impacts on the mom's perceptions, right?
Yep.
In Chile, we do have a strong.
Well, we don't know. What we know is that the moms are fairly accurate. So both of these people are perceiving the same individual. So this could be this correlation could simply be that they both are, there's an element of truth into both of their perceptions.
Okay. Or that both of them are biased in the same direction.
Right.
The thing is that.
But they're also accurate a lot. So there's a bias there and there's an accuracy piece there, and all the way through I've said they're both pretty accurate and then slightly biased.
So you don't have the kid's performance in that model. So
Well, the teachers are Well, no, we don't have a standardized test. We couldn't do that.
Yes.
We have state tests that we control for. But the teachers' ratings are correlate with the state tests about 0.8.
Yeah. And in the test, in the state test, the girls make worse than the boys?
No. The girls do. There's no difference. If you look at the means, the girls are doing better than the boys at the first and second grade.
Okay, so there is a prejudice or negative expectation.
Well, that's not captured here. I'd have to do a sex by teacher rating interaction. So, I think there is, but it's not captured here.
Yeah. So I have two questions that I wanted to use that as a way to think of other realities like ours. And here in Chile we have like very early gender differences they are quite big even.
Well, on standardized tests, right?
Yes.
What about on grades?
Grades, I don't remember, can you know?
In grades, I think the girls do better, but in standardized tests, they don't.
Right, and so there's a lot of people talking about that. I mean, we know that girls do less well than boys do on tests for a variety of reasons. And when people have suggested that if they're high stakes tests, that the girls see them as more, I mean, this goes back to the Yerke-Dodson curve. So if girls, in fact, are more tied in, and there's a curvilinear relationship between performance and anxiety, and the girls are more likely to be on the downside of that curve, they will perform more poorly than the boys, even if they are equally capable.
Okay, but I wanted to add another element. We can detect these things very early in Chile. And during the first grade, most of the teachers are women.
Yep.
So I would like to ask you an evaluation about the fact that how is it possible that having a workforce that is mostly female is producing this trend that is so biased against girls? So what we should, I mean, you are doing teacher training, right?
Right.
And most of the people that go to teacher training, at least here in Chile, especially from the 3-4 years, are female. So, I am the man of two girls, so I'm very sensitive to that, and I see it. And most of the math teachers at school with my daughters are females, and I see that thing happening. So the question is, how do you put this into consideration for teacher training?
Yeah.
And I have a second question. and I promise to go to say this. The other question is that when Diane Halpern have produced some reviews about gender differences, and one of the issues that is that is somehow overlooked is the fact that it seems that girls are better than males in many places in language, and that in different spoken English. So we put a lot more attention into this because math is related to reading and power and so on, career success. But what could you say about the other side of what you have found, about the English stuff, about the fact that there is also a bias against boys on language?
You've asked me many questions. No, to answer those would take, and I have thought about many of them. Yes, the teacher. So how could this be with female teachers? Well, female teachers are likely to be just as stereotyped as male teachers. So I don't think it's hard to understand why a female teacher could produce perceptions that are biased in the gender direction the same way as a male teacher could. And in the United States, I don't know that here, the potential downside is that the female teachers themselves, because they've gone through the socialization system, are less likely to be comfortable about their own math abilities. And so what we're finding is that they are then also communicating that to the girls. So not only will they be distorted in their view, they will also be more likely to communicate to the girls that it's to be expected that they won't do as well, or that it will be hard for them, and that they will need to work harder. So I think those are things that we can understand. And when The other thing that I've become very concerned, so I don't know if this is true here or not, but so you were saying how could female teachers end up being biased against females? Well, we are now gotten very concerned with the fact that if you actually look at who's being biased against in elementary school, who is suffering in elementary school, it probably is not girls, it's probably boys. So they get it on the language side, they get it on the behavior side, they get it on the learning disability side. So if you go down and look at the things that happen to boys in elementary school, they are much more likely to be treated in a way that indicates that the teachers don't trust them, that they are not good enough, that they are a problem. So I think this turns the issue of for whom is school a chilly climate on its head. And so to some extent, I think our focus on girls and math has distracted us for many years from this other phenomenon. And of course, that's now becoming very, very salient. So now we've got, I began this work on the women in math, and I wanted to come up with a theoretical framework that did not lead us to concluding that females are just not good males. I wanted to understand something about why the girls did what they did. And so I tried to pull it apart and understand what were these processes that would lead them to underestimate their abilities, and then what would lead them to make choices later on, given that they had lived in a world that led them to underestimate their abilities and in this one area, and maybe they're interested in it. And so I didn't study, well, what's going on with the boys. Our data is, the parents are much more, I mean, when you looked at the table of differential treatment, you could also look at how many items had to do with the kinds of things parents would do with boys as opposed to with girls. So it looks like parents are doing a lot more with boys, but that's because those items are the kinds of things parents do with boys. If you look at the reading items, the parents are really not giving boys enough practice doing reading from early on. So they're getting their boys out doing active activities. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the boys end up neither liking reading as well nor doing as well in reading as the girls do. Whether that's related to other kinds of processes, I mean, I'm not so willing to rule out biological processes. I think they may well be there, but they are being exacerbated by social experiences. And I think that's true for both kinds. Now, in terms of training teachers, this is where I come down to a disagreement with Gwen. I think it's not a good idea. If I were to tell, if you want to deal with math and girls, I think it's in fact not a good idea to tell the teachers to never tell a girl that she has potential talent in math. And that's what they do. They don't tell them that. They tell them, oh, you're working hard. I think and the difference is that for boys, they're telling them both that they work hard and they have potential. They can think about becoming an engineer. So I think we get ourselves into an odd situation if we say don't ever praise the kids' talent. Because then what we do is we have them coming away thinking they're not so good in that subject. Well, maybe they are really good. So I would say the best thing a teacher could do for a high-achieving girl would be call up that girl's parents and say, you have a very high-achieving daughter in math. She likes it. She's good at it. You should give her some advice about how she might want to use that in the future. And that would be an intervention that, in fact, might get some parents doing some slightly different. Now, I don't think they should push their girl unnecessarily, but they certainly should make the option available to her. So she knows that's something that she could pick if she wanted to. Now, one more thing. So the other thing on the English stuff is we now have, I didn't show it today, but we're getting increasing evidence, except to show this crossover effect. We're getting increasing evidence to suggest that girls reach the end of high school much more likely than boys to believe that they're good in both math and language. If anything, girls are reaching the end of high school when they make these decisions with a view that they have a wider range of talents than the boys do. The boys, for some reason in the US, are allowed to specialize and in many ways encouraged to specialize. So if they're not doing so well in one thing, people will say, oh, that's okay, you're going to be good at this. And that's a more okay conclusion than for a girl where what's important is that she is a good student. Well-rounded, exactly. And so what we're finding is if you get to the end of high school and you think you're both good in math and English, you are more likely to pick something that's not math. And it isn't because you think you're not good in math. So if you actually look where the differential and career choices are coming from, it's not coming, so if you think of boys and girls and good at math, bad at math, or girls good at math and good at English, yes, no. Where you're getting the difference is you're getting the difference in the cell of I'm good in English and I'm good in math, and in that cell you're getting boys to go into math and girls to go about half and half. Okay? In the cell of I'm not good at math and I am good at English, both boys and girls will go towards English. If you've got the cell I'm good at math and not good at English, both boys and girls will go to that cell. If I'm not good in either, I'll find something else to do. It's in this cell of where I think I have equivalent potential in both of them, where you're getting the gender difference. And it's also that girls are more likely to be in that cell. So when we pull it out, the reason that the girls aren't going on in math and science is not because they don't like math and science, it's because they like something else better. And that's being socialized in many ways by some of these processes that are giving them a message that that's true, even if it's not true all along. Okay, there's some.
Well, my question was really near to the question of somebody right there. It's about the teacher's realm. I was thinking that sometimes, of course, teachers doesn't have much more time as parents in the whole life of the kid. And how much does the teacher influence in just 1 year can change something in the kid? For example, this math teacher that I just have him for just 1 year, how could he make me think that I'm going to be good at math, or think that just for being a boy I'm not going to be good at language, for example?
I think that's absolutely correct. Teachers have a more labile influence. But like some of the social psychology experiments, if that teacher can get the kid to think a little bit differently, so this is another case where you could think about, well, should we be encouraging effort or talent? If a teacher can encourage all of the low-achieving kids to believe that they can get better, and the high-achieving kids that they actually could go on and be great scientists, then that could in fact create a mindset that would be beneficial from that point on. So I think that's the case. There's actually now a wonderful. Okay, and I'm a little bit heavy. So I'm aware of it, and I was monitoring it, so I was paying attention. There's now so Judy Harakevich and her colleagues have done a very nice intervention with parents, making this same point that parents are the untapped resource. And the intervention that they made was with high school kids. And they created a web program that talks about different careers. I mean, it really comes back to career advice. And how do we think about helping our young people make the best career choice for them? So she, in fact, created a booklet that talked about all kinds of things one needs science for. And for both boys and girls. And she talked about the advantages of being in occupations that rely heavily on science, all the way from a hairdresser to a nuclear physicist. And what she found was that it was a randomized control trial. They created this, and then they got the parents to go to a website. And in the website, it gave the parents a place to send their children to go to a website with this kind of information. She succeeded in getting all of the kids, both boys and girls, whose parents got this information, to take 1 more year of science in high school. And there's no intervention with teachers that's getting that big of an effect. It was a very strong effect. The problem was getting the parents to participate. So you have to have a way of getting to the parents. I mean, once they knew about it, they would do it. But how do you get to them and let them know what you're doing, what's available, what resource you have? That's a place that a teacher can play a very important role. So thinking about how teachers can help parents play a more continuing role is probably a good way to be thinking about what we should be doing more of.
Yo creo que tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más.
I was waiting to see I was going to ask you about whether there's any cultural data, what cultures value or what you said about music. What we see is that, I don't know if you feel this way, but Mané is studying also math activities that parents do with children, and people in general seem to be, I don't know, less interested or appallingly have low interest in science and math in general, and for boys and girls, and like math activities are very, you showed there, most were zeros, and very few 4s and 5s. And in science I also see that, and I don't know if with the 5 societies where, like the example you said with music, this is different, and whether this is different for everybody or there's some interaction. I don't know if you're aware of any cultural.
There's a lot of work that's been done in China and Japan. So Harold Stevenson actually worked in Peru also. So there are definitely cultures that put more value on number systems, on counting systems, on using numbers as a way of communicating things of value. And the kids there are, this is again interesting, they tend to rate their ability lower and that their efforts higher, but they also tend to believe they can go on and study these things. So yes, there are cultural differences on all of this phenomenon, and they should be looked at more seriously.
Do they exacerbate the difference between boys and girls, or they minimize, or we don't know?
No, so in some of those cultures, so what we know is if you look at career choices, I mean, if you look at the PISA data, there are countries where girls do better on the math test than boys, countries where there's no difference, and countries where boys do better than girls. And it doesn't fall out the way you might expect.
I don't know if you know that we have one of the largest gender gaps in PISA.
Well, what I was going to say is the gender gaps actually tend to be larger in Western industrialized countries. So they're larger in places like here than they would be in Mexico, for example, or than in India, or than in, so the closer you are to a European tradition and a democracy, yes, counter to what you may think.
But that's because the male develops more, or
Well, that's hard to say because these are
what is the controlling for a chick? The question is, we have a land staff in America, but also within the Latin American so the question is whether it has to do with differential.
Well, and I haven't seen the data. I mean, I think it's both the differential, but this is sort of a very interesting phenomenon. They're just now, I've heard these reports because I don't study the PISA data in particular, but where they're showing they have this gender type coefficient, you know, for the gender typing in the labor market and the gender typing in performances. And they're finding that the gender gap is not related, as you might expect, to more developing countries, but it's more likely to be larger in countries that are more democratic and more modern. And in part that's because in other countries, many fewer people get educated at all, and girls are a resource, so they don't see the difference. So all that is saying is this difference does vary.
Antes de que se vayan, los quiero dejar a todos invitados a la charla que la profesora Eccles va a dar en la inauguración del año académico el lunes a las 10:30 en el auditorio del UC. Espero que se vayan bien, puertas abiertas. Y también hay ahora la oportunidad para los estudiantes graduados y de postgrado para tener una sesión de trabajo con ella y conversar con ella aquí mismo después de eso.
La idea es que, si me permiten, puede ser una conversación un poco más libre, no necesariamente tiene que ser como de los datos, los contenidos. O sea, si quieren preguntarles sobre cómo abordar los estudios de posgrado, ver cómo pueden mirarlo en un sentido mucho más amplio la conversación. I'm just telling them that the conversation with you now for graduate students and masters doesn't have to be specifically about data, about the work. It can be also about life, you know.
I've had a lot of that.
I think it's really important for graduate students to see this side of the academic world closer. So that's the point.
And are we meeting here?
Yes, you can stay here. Let me see.
Thank you very much.